Hey everybody, just wanted to do a quick update here on my waterfall tank. I'm taking a break from a little project I've been working on this afternoon. It's another rainy day and I can't really get out and get any work done, so why not tinker around with some project. Now, I really ought to be doing water changes and basic maintenance and stuff like that, but I got an idea today, and when I get an idea, I gotta run with it. So before I show you what my new project's going to be, and it's not going to be another fish tank or anything, I'll let you know it's already, it's going to be about lighting and plant growth and stuff like that. So if you were thinking it's going to be a new fish tank or something, don't get your hopes up. But I am going to be setting my little experiment up sort of near this tank, I think, maybe. I'm not really sure yet, and if that's the case, I want to do an update on this before I start shooting video of that, because I haven't gotten everybody caught up to date over here yet. So now that you've had a little look, you've probably noticed, we may as well start by talking about the elephant in the room. I dug up a patch of daylilies out in the yard. I even got a bonus hosta in with the daylilies. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but you can just make out some hosta leaf in there, and there's another hosta leaf back there. I'm hoping it'll sort of grow up and out, and we'll actually see some hosta growing up through there. But I got to thinking about, I often see daylilies growing out at the riverside and in the stream, and it's often growing right up and out of the edge of the water. So I don't see any reason why it wouldn't do the same right here. And so I went out in the yard. Of course, we've got 10 billion daylilies out in the yard. These are just going to be roadside orange, nothing fancy or anything. And my eyes were bigger than my waterfall, and I dug up what I thought was a small clump, and that's what it looks like. So when the flower spikes start coming up, I'm afraid they're going to go straight up into the ceiling, and we're actually going to have flowers way up here. So we'll see. What I'm really hoping will happen is that the flower spikes will come out and they'll grow towards this LED light source, and we'll get this cool 3D effect of like these plant stalks and flower stalks sticking right out in their faces as we walk up to the tank. When I move the camera around like this, the parallax will be really interesting to see those flowers sort of hovering out in midair like that. So we'll look forward to that, but that's going to be a ways down the road. Daylilies won't be blooming until the middle or end of June, and that's if they actually bloom down here. That'll be exciting to see in its own right. For the top tier, I cleaned all that old junk out. I got rid of all that old wood and all that stuff that was just dirtying up the tank. I put in a little cloth planter with some potting soil and a variegated sweet potato vine. Likewise over here, except it is sort of that dark maroon purple sweet potato vine. I've got some Java fern. And then back here I planted a big wad I took out of my tank in the other room is both types of broadleaf and lace leaf water sprite. So that should grow up and be all nice and big and bushy, and eventually this water source will be covered. I do like seeing the water flow in, but the way it just sort of looks like it's flowing out of a pipe sticking out of the ground is not really that great. I thought about doing something to cover it up, but I thought, you know what, if I wait a week or two, that water sprite will grow up and over and completely cover it, so I'm not too worried about that. I also took that rock that, if you really follow along and remember, I pulled a big rock out of here, which is where this made room for that to now go in. So that rock is now sitting up here. Remember, this basin of water is fairly deep. It's about 6 or 8 inches deep in there. So I had to kind of lean that rock against the forward, that forward edge. It's not even sitting all the way down on the bottom. So there's room for improvement, changes, whatever up there, but that's what I've got going on so far. I took my plant that I was formerly referring to as a philodendron. One of my viewers corrected me and told me what it actually is, and of course I have no idea, cannot remember what it is, but it is not a philodendron. When I bought it, the person at the garden center, I asked them what it was because I really liked it, and they said they weren't sure, but based on the leaf shape and everything, it was probably a philodendron or in the philodendron family. And so ever since then, I've been calling it that. But it is actually the arrowhead type plant or an arrowhead plant. It's in that family, and I don't know if this is actually one of the ones that's called an arrowhead or not. But again, it's not a philodendron. I know that. Again, I can't remember the name. I'm terrible with remembering names because, frankly, I don't care. It's all academic, It's that plant. It's doing what it's doing. It looks the way it looks. What it's called is really not that important to me. Now, obviously, when people ask me what it is, I like to be able to tell them, and I don't like to call it a philodendron when it's not. But, you know, the idea of me, like, really stressing out about learning the names of all these plants and the scientific names of all the different species and all that, it's not that important to me. I really don't care. You know, look at it. It's gorgeous. You know, that's what I care about, is what I'm actually seeing from it. So we've got that going on. Down here in the tank proper, I've just done a series of water changes recently. When I put those big wad of daylilies in there, there's a big old clump of earth and mud attached to that, so it really dirtied up the tank. And if we actually get down here and look in the tank, you can see how much dirt is all over all the rocks and everything, so it really kind of looks like a stream bottom now. We'll get a little look at one of my sculpins, and those little white dots you can see on the glass are nearite snail eggs. If you look closely, you can see them on this rock in here. They're all over the place. Those nearite snails are just depositing their eggs everywhere. Now, if I understand it correctly, nearite snail eggs will not hatch unless they're in at least high-end brackish to marine water in order to get them to hatch. So this is brackish water, but it's low-end brackish water. And honestly, I'm really thinking about redoing this tank. The only reason this tank looks the way it does is because I had red-clawed crabs in here, and I don't know if I still do. So if I don't have red-clawed crabs in here, then there's no need for me to have brackish water in here. I can certainly just do fresh water. I've got 5 little Endler's guppies in there. I've been watching them. I really enjoy watching them swim around in the very small amount of water in the shallow tank. Now that rock is covering water, so they do have more room to swim around than you might think. You can see there's water over here, and these rocks are all sort of covering the surface. They're not filling the volume. But if there's no red claw crabs in there that really need to be in brackish water, while those Endlers can be in brackish water, they don't need to be. And I can make this a freshwater tank, and we can do something else to it or modify it, or I can actually just fill it up with water and make it an actual fish tank instead of this sort of half and half. But that's an idea, that's an option. It's been something I've been thinking about for a while now, because again, it's only really set up this way because I needed to, you know, I had those red-clawed crabs, and if I'm going to have animals, I've got to set up an appropriate habitat for them, and that's what I did. And so maybe it's time to change this habitat to something more appropriate for fish. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. This is actually a little piece of the temple plant that's growing in my office tank. I cut it off. It's not all wrinkly like that because it's dying. It was like that because it was practically touching the light that it was growing under in my office tank. And so what I've done is I've cut all, or at least most, of the flower stalks off, because that's just going to use up a lot of energy that we don't need to waste on flowers. Right now I want this plant to go back into generative growth. I want it to start developing a root system again rather than concentrating on reproduction and developing flowers. So I broke all the flowers off in hopes that the trauma of having the flowers removed, and of course the stem being broken like that, should trigger it to start producing roots again. But that far along in the flowering cycle, if that is a flowering annual, it might simply be too late. It might be too far along in its natural life cycle. A flowering annual is pretty much done once it's finished flowering. So if that was on its way through its flowering cycle and was wrapping up, or would be wrapping up soon, then it may not, you know, it may just sort of die back from what it is now since I've cut it off. If, however, it's one of those vigorous growers that just keeps growing and flowering and growing and flowering, then it probably will switch gears. We'll get some hormonal changes, and then that'll promote the root growth, and we'll sort of switch out of the flowering mode for a little while, and then once it's reestablished and gotten going again, my goal, my hopes anyway, is to plant it in this tank, because for as crazy as that thing's growing out of my office tank and growing up to the ceiling, I'd love to see what it does growing up out of this tank underneath this fantastic lighting. So not only would it look great under that lighting, it would do really well under that lighting, because this is like an artificial sun down here. Most of the plants that you see that have come out of my yard actually do better indoors than they do outdoors. I don't really have any part of my yard that is considered full sun. So down here underneath this LED, it's certainly not the same intensity as the sun, but there's never any cloud cover. It comes on every morning at 10 o'clock, and it's on for 12 hours every day, and it's just uninterrupted light all day long, and it's a good high quality light. and the plants really thrive and do well under it. One thing I am concerned about is this crazy wacky plant, whatever this thing is. It started falling over and drooping, and it really seems weak down here, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's a root system thing. I don't know if it's possibly the aphids that were all over it weakened it. Perhaps it was the soapy water I sprayed on it had some damaging effect, although I can't imagine how that would be the case, but you never know. I have been keeping an eye on it. I was looking today. I could see some little aphid husks on it. I touched them. Every single one I touched was just a dead remains of an aphid, so cross my fingers. I think maybe, although I know it's silly to say, but I think maybe we might have gotten on top of the aphids. I'm really going to keep my eyes out, and instead of doing what I've been doing, which is saying, oh, there's a couple aphids, I'm not too worried about it. I'll get to it, and I'll get to it. Within days, you've got lots of aphids. So I'm going to try to stay on top of it to where if I see any aphids, I'm just on it. I'm going to spray them, and in fact, I'm going to do what I did last time, which was just go nuts with the spray bottle. I sprayed everything. I hosed it down with soapy water and did a massive water change during the process. While I was spraying it with water and soap, I was doing the water change, and then after I was finished, I did another water change. And that last spraying seems to be about the last of the aphids. Again, crossing my fingers there. I will also point out, I almost forgot to mention this little Christmas fern in here is a new addition. I just tucked that in there today. This I think is a bromelade, I'm not sure, but I've been having trouble finding where to put that. It doesn't do really well under strong lighting. It doesn't like its feet wet. I think I've got it good now. It's kind of shaded by all the other growth, which I knew eventually I was going to get enough growth in here that I'd have some shadowy areas. And the way my water flow has changed, I'm no longer getting the water flowing in here so much. It's damp down here, but it's not wet. If you'll notice, I don't have the water dripping. It used to run and drip across the whole face, and it doesn't anymore. It only comes out of the basin here where it was sort of designed to. It was never really meant to come out of this side. It just sort of did. And so now that doesn't happen anymore, but it is moist enough that I think I can keep stuff like fern doing well over there. So again, hoping we get some good Christmas fern growing up and out of there. I moved my poinsettia up over here just to give it a little more light, at least for a little while. That gets moved around, from time to time, depending on what look I'm going for, or, if I want to look at this portion of the tank in the evening, perhaps I'll take this plant and I'll move it out of the way and I'll put it somewhere else. That way I can look, this way in through the glass rather than down into it. So stuff gets moved around a lot, changed up, and, that's why I do these updates from time to time. In this case, I just added a lot of stuff and made some serious changes, so it was worth taking a few extra minutes to go over all that stuff. So having said all that, I am going to be shooting a video here in the near future. I know I'm terrible at promising videos and then never shooting them. I really do have the best intentions. When I say this, it's just I've got so many videos I'd like to shoot, and it's just I seldom get around to doing all of them. But I really do want to talk about the difference between 6500K and 2700K. I get asked questions about that a lot. And I actually was going to use the example of something I'm doing in the other room. I did not set it up as an experiment, but I thought it would make for an interesting example, and that was that I rescued a little bit of catnip from out in the yard. One of my cats looked like it was attacking the mud, and when we investigated, there was a little tiny stump of green sticking out of the ground, and it turns out it was like the remains of a little tiny piece of catnip that had started coming up. Apparently our catnip plant last year dropped some seeds or something, and so just on a whim I dug it up. I dug it up with a little stick that was sitting right there. Again, we're talking about something that was the size of a pencil point. It was a little tiny thing sticking out of the ground. And so I stuck it in a little cloth planter, and I stuck it in a box underneath of a little light, a little 40-watt equivalent LED, and it's a 2700K light. It's a very high-quality 2700K light, but it is a 2700K light, and I knew it would do just fine, and I actually put it under the 2700K deliberately because I was hoping for root development, and of course root development is one of the things you get with that red light that you get from that 2700K. So there's pros and cons to using both, and there's a lot of myths about and confusion about it. In fact, let me put you on pause here for half a second and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about, but this is not going to be my new experiment coming up. This is actually just going to be the inspiration for it. So hang on half a second. And this is what I'm talking about. So this is just a small cardboard box. I cut a hole in top of it, and I hung one of those little LED lights with the globe diffuser broken off of it, so the LEDs are just exposed. And again, this is a 40 watt equivalent. It's a little more intense than that since I broke the diffuser off, but it's still a very low wattage light. It's not very bright at all. And you can see this here is the catnip I was talking about. And I accidentally watered it with, I didn't realize I was watering it with plant food the other day, and it's a little tender and young for that, and I got some leaf curl going on. But this was almost nothing when I stuck it in this planter, and it's been in here for maybe, I don't know, 2 weeks, something like that. This is a little bit of the sweet potato vine that I just showed you in the waterfall tank. I decided I would take a little cutting and stick it in here as well. This 3 days in here maybe. We don't know if it's got roots yet. I doubt it does that quickly. And this is some salvia that was struggling where I had it, so I decided that I would just move it over here. And again, that is under a very, very small 2700K LED. And you can see how well it's all doing, except for the burnt up catnip there. So I decided to set up a little more sophisticated experiment, and if you subscribe, you won't miss that. So look forward to that coming up real soon. I am going to shoot some video of that, and then of course we will also talk about the lighting and all that kind of stuff I was talking about. So don't forget, we were just looking at my waterfall tank. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.